I looked at the pictures and kind of went, oh man, I cannot be that dumb.
Moving out 9 times the speed of sound. Roger.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to be committing the ultimate automotive sin, and that is modifying my daily vehicle. Something I have sworn to never do ever again, probably about 17 times in the last couple of years. And what's worse is I'm actually modifying my wife's daily car. So good luck to me. Now, I picked up the 2012 Touareg behind me in the fall last year with the intent of never doing any work to it whatsoever. I went with a VR6 motor over the diesel because I did not want any emission issues, and I wanted as little maintenance as possible on this car. Now, unfortunately, when I went to see the car, we had about 2 feet of snow in Canada. I obviously couldn't go underneath the car and inspect it very well. So by the time the winter was done, I noticed severe wear on my winter tires at the back. When I finally got the truck on the lift, I noticed both rear springs are broken. Now, this Touareg came with the sport package, which includes the 20-inch wheels, the HIDs, and sport suspension, which means that the springs are a little bit lower, the shocks are different, that kind of stuff. I called Volkswagen to order 2 new springs because I had zero intention of actually doing suspension work on this other than replacing the broken springs. And unfortunately, the sport springs that I needed were backordered in all of North America. I wasn't in a massive rush. I ordered them anyways. However, after waiting for them for about a month and a half, 2, it was time to actually do something else because Volkswagen had no idea when these springs were actually going to show up. The only other alternative, and I did try to find them online, I did try to find a second-hand set, but those part numbers were just not available. The only other alternative out there was the H&R Sport Springs, which lowered the vehicle, which I really didn't want to do. But for the price of those 2 springs at Volkswagen, I was able to get a whole set of springs, brand new springs from H&R. And I think at least 2 of the shocks I was going to replace, because once the springs were coming out, I was going to be replacing the shocks. Anyways, long story short, in today's episode, I'm going to start off with a little bit of maintenance. I'm going to do a transmission and transfer case oil change. Then I'm going to go ahead and swap the springs with H&R Sports front and back. And I actually picked up a set of Bilstein B4 OEM sport shocks to go with it. Since I'm already taking the springs out, I figured might as well replace the shocks while I'm at it. And we're going to wrap up with the ECS mid-muffler delete. It's a great unit, and of course on the Touareg, as you all know, to replace the shocks and springs, you have to remove the exhaust. So this would be an excellent time to install some good old VR6 sounds to go with my daily vehicle. All right, let's get to work. In the front, we're going to start off by unclipping the hoses off the hub carrier. The next we're going to do is undo the nut on the control arm and split them up. There's a few different ways you can split this up. Obviously you can hammer it, hope for the best. Definitely don't hammer on the bottom of the ball joint unless you're trying to, break it. I like this tool. It usually works pretty good. As you're putting that in, watch out for the rubber on the ball joint. What I like to do is tighten the tool and then heat up the ball joint until it separates. Do be careful with this. When the ball joint finally lets go, it's usually pretty dramatic. Like I said, pretty dramatic. With that out of the way, unhook the sway bar link from the sway bar and undo the bolt holding the shock to the lower control arm. So now the shock body is completely detached from the bottom. We've got 3 bolts up at the top. So once we take them off, this is going to be loose and we can take it out of the way. On the passenger side, the 3 bolts that you're trying to access are down there. So it's a little bit more tricky. On the driver's side, it's a little bit more accessible. You don't have to take anything off to access the 3 bolts for the top of the shock mount. Now, if you're patient enough, I suspect you can probably squeeze in some wrenches and stuff. You don't have to take stuff off, but honestly, it's really not that big a deal. We can get the air box out of the way, clean out some of the cables, and you've got much easier access to the bolts. With the airbox out of the way, you can see much easier access to the 3 bolts right there. I believe on the diesel motor, the fuel filter sits about there, so you might have to take that out, but one way or another, you're gonna have to get yourself access to these 3 bolts so you can take the shock out. Next thing we got to do is split the assembly up. There's a little cap at the top here, which comes off. There's your nut for the shock. Now, you're gonna have to put a clamp on the shock, because what you don't want to do is undo the nut and obviously the whole assembly falls apart. I like using my trusty spring compressor. It's pretty heavy duty, but at least you know it's not going to get anybody killed. Now, you can't compress the spring yet because then you won't be able to undo the nut. You need the tension in the spring to be able to undo the nut. So what I normally do is I grab the spring without compressing it, just so if the nut comes out, this doesn't come shooting out, and the tool will catch it. Once the nut is loose, you can compress the spring and then just take the nut off. Now we can compress the spring. We got to take two things off the shock before we toss it out. This blade has to come off, as the new shock does not have it. And the sway bar link if you're not planning to replace it. Although you're already halfway there, they're not very expensive. This is a good time to do it. To be able to put the nut back on, we have to compress the spring because right now we just don't have, we can't even reach the shaft of the shock there. So let's compress the spring, put it all together. Now, one thing you want to check before you start tightening everything up is the position of those 3 bolts relative to the axis of the shock. You kind of want to get it in the right position. You are able to twist it after the fact, but it's just a little bit harder. So if you can get it close, that would be ideal. Now that we have the nut started on the shock, what I want to do is let go of the spring so that the spring stretches out, pulls the shock so that we can actually tighten the nut. Obviously double check that your spring is seated properly in the spring mounts, top and bottom. And now we have to tighten the nut. Put the cap back up on top. And now we have to wiggle this back into place and put all the bolts back. That's it pretty much for that. We're gonna torque the bolts once the vehicle's on the ground with all 4 shocks done. Front left is pretty much the exact same thing. You've got your control arm, 3 bolts at the top, shock mount bolt at the bottom, and the bolt for the sway bar link. Obviously watch out for the cables. You don't wanna tear those up and cause yourself more work. For the rear spring replacement, things are slightly easier. There's 4 bolts at the top and really only 1 bolt holding the shock and spring assembly at the bottom. To access the bolts at the top, you're gonna have to take off the cover and the 2 side strips that sit here. It's pretty straightforward. There's only 2 bolts really on the front and the back, and then the strip just comes out. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 bolts. The ones here are hiding behind these little plastic caps. These ones are sitting inside the car. Now there's 2 longer and 2 shorter bolts holding the shock assembly to the vehicle here. And one thing you want to watch out for is these are quite long and the bottoms of them are fitting inside the housing here. If you want to avoid potentially this situation where you can shear one of the bolts, I suggest taking your time. You've got some access from the bottom to heat the housing. So if you see the bolts are not coming off easily, do not put more torque because you're going to shear them. And frankly, if you shear that bolt like I did on the other side, it's quite a lot of work to try and drill that out from the housing. You might have to go buy another housing and so on. Take your time, hit them from the bottom. It's really not a big deal. There's really only 5 bolts that you got to deal with here, so just take your time on this one, trust me. Yeah, here we go. So the bolts are not coming off easily, so let's put some heat on the bottom to sort of help the process. One thing you want to keep in mind, this is a bushing here and here. So if you go too crazy with the heat, you might actually start destroying the bushing. So try to focus on the bolt, which is sticking out here, and the actual housing. So despite my best effort, 1 bolt on each side proved extremely problematic. On the left side, I managed to shear it. So now I'm trying to drill it out of the housing. That's taking a little bit of time. And on the right side, so on the left side it was actually the long one. On the right side it was a short one. And you can see it was very hard to get it out even once you got going. I put a ton of heat in this, and it looks like it's already screwed up the housing threads there. So as soon as I pull out the housing, we'll take a look. I doubt it's going to be salvageable, so I'm probably going to have to go ahead and just buy 2 new housings for the rear springs and shocks, unfortunately. Now, I've had many discussions with people over seized bolts, and the thing is, if you're living north of the Rust Belt, so sort of north of the Canada-US border, where there's a ton of salt on the roads every single winter, these things become serious problems. And this is, you know, if you're trying to do this in Florida, you're not going to have any of these issues. But if you're trying to do this somewhere where you're going to see a lot of salt and grime on the road, be prepared to, you know, have some patience when you're trying to pull these out, because otherwise you're just going to set yourself up for a lot of headache. The top bolts are out. Let's go take a look at the bottom. There we go. So that was pretty easy. And yeah, this is absolutely pummeled the thread on that housing. Yeah, here we go. So here's the main issue that I was having. Obviously, this is not good. To be honest, both sides were broken. And outside of Mercedes, I've never really seen sort of stock springs break like this. I have no idea how this can happen. I mean, we've been doing springs for, you know, decades now. So anyways. So this is the reason why I had to replace the springs on the car. Now, what I wanted to show you though is the thread in the housing here. So it's 100% destroyed. And frankly, I put so much heat into this bolt that I'm not really sure that I could have saved it anymore. This is what happened on the other side. I sheared the bolt inside, so I've spent the last, you know, couple of hours there trying to drill it out. But at the end of the day, I think I might be due for new housings. The problem really is if you put a lot of heat into the bolts here, you might start melting the bushing. Unfortunately, there's really no good way to isolate from that. And here with the heat I was putting on this side, you could actually start seeing the bushing smoking a little bit. I'm gonna have to check on the price of these things and see if it's viable for me to just get new ones rather than trying to repair and reuse these ones. In any case, we still have to take this apart. Process is about the same as in the front.
So here we go, we're 2 for 2. The two springs have broken in virtually the exact same spot. And I don't know. To me that means that there's something wrong with the manufacturing or with the design of this. But there you have it. The two sport springs broke in the exact same way. Both sides. This thing is chewing up my rear tires right now. So I'm looking forward to replacing this, getting an alignment, and seeing if that's gonna stop. Right, with the brackets cleaned up, let's put everything back together. We've got the new Bilstein shocks. Exact same thing as on the front. We put in the old spring support perch. Then on top of it, we have the rubber mounts for spring support. And as you imagine, similarly, we're gonna have to figure out the rotation once everything's mounted up. The next thing that goes on is the actual spring. Line it up with the rubber mount. Bump stops. There you go. Then we have the bracket on top. There's only really one way to put this in. I don't think you can get it wrong. Right, so there's the rear shock done. I'll be completely honest with you, this was harder than I thought. There was no real good way to film this for you. There was a lot of banging, a lot of swearing, and frankly, this is not really set up very user-friendly. Now, I thought I'm possibly doing this the wrong way, and maybe there's a tool to do it, but I went online, checked out quite a few manuals out there. And as far as I can tell, really the only thing that I didn't do that's recommended is to use a nice long piece of wood, like a 2x4 in here, to push the hub down so you can fit the spring in. That's not a very... That's a pretty non-system... That's a pretty weird way to do this as an instruction, but, you know, it is what it is. The point is, I did this with lowering springs, and it was still hard. I imagine if you were doing a lift kit, which adds usually about 2 inches to the spring there, it might be even harder. I don't know what to tell you other than the procedure I followed is attach the top 4 bolts in the trunk, and then compress the spring and, you know, trying to push it into place while trying to wiggle it into the hub assembly. So the back's pretty problematic. Take your time. There's really... I couldn't find a good way to put a spring compressor in there. Mine's too big, so it doesn't really fit. I suspect if you had the two little Harbor Freight units, you may be able to do it, but I don't know. Either way, the back was pretty hard to do. The front's much, much easier. Now, before I tighten all of the bolts up, what I'm going to do is put the wheels on, bring the car on the ground. These are brand new shocks and springs, so let them settle down a little bit. I'll go outside of the garage for a sec, you know, let the car kind of settle. And then I'm going to tighten the bolts with weight on the springs. Alright, so that's a little weird. I haven't torqued the control arms yet, but I've got quite a bit of a drop in the front and really not much of a drop in the back. Right. You just watched me install the full suspension on the Touareg, which by the way is a fairly involved job. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I took the car out so the suspension can settle, and as you saw, the rear is sitting at about 3 inches higher than the front. I I spent a little bit of time thinking, did I do something wrong? What happened there? I went online. People suggested you have to undo the control arm so the vehicle can settle into the new height position, stuff like that. I tried all of that. The height is the same. Nothing's changed. So last night I went ahead and sent an email to H&R Springs, which to my surprise, they answered pretty much right away. So as far as customer support goes for a big company like H&R, that's pretty impressive. One of the things they asked me in the email was, can you send us the part numbers for the front and the back springs so we can just verify that everything's correct? I went ahead, took pictures of the springs, sent it to them, and literally as I hit the send button, I realized what mistake I had made. Now, when we do these YouTube videos, it's pretty easy to make mistakes unhappen, right? We can do it in post-editing, we fix it, you don't know any better. But this is a bit of a teachable moment because frankly, the mistake I did was very silly. Anybody can probably do the same thing, and it's going to cost me a good day worth of work to correct something that really shouldn't have happened. In my hand here, I've got the technical information. Important, please read before installation that came with the H&R springs. Now, the absolute first thing that it says on this piece of paper is notes for H&R springs. Front springs are marked with either an F or a VA, and rear springs are marked with either an R or an HA. So let's take a look at the front spring and see what it is that you think I did wrong. I'll give you a minute. Right. I installed the rear spring in the front and the front spring in the back. So how did that happen? I can tell you exactly how it happened. I opened the package, looked at the installation instructions, saw the note for the front and the rear and said, roger that, and tossed it on the shelf. And then 2-3 days later, when it was actually time to install everything, I looked at the two springs, did not even bother reading the part numbers, just kind of assumed that the bigger spring goes in the front and the smaller spring goes in the back, installed everything and went on by merry day. So totally preventable, completely unnecessary, and has just cost me a day worth of work. So I'll tell you what, while you guys learn from my mistake, I'm gonna go ahead and swap this out so that we can finish this job today and basically learn a lesson that when instructions come in, read them and make sure you follow them if you want to save yourself a lot of headaches. Now this could be worse. I didn't blow up an engine or anything like that. It's completely reversible. It's not a big deal. But truly, I'm usually doing these things in a bit of a hurry because I don't have any time. And this is going to set me back quite a bit. So anyways, sit back, enjoy while I go cry in the corner.
Ah, that's much better. Apparently, if you follow the instructions, you can get the right height set just right. So, lesson learned, follow the instructions.
Install the ECS crossover delete, which basically fits right there and gets rid of this piece. We're gonna have to take off the clamps here, measure at the back, cut the pipe, and then just throw it in there. With the clamps undone, what we want to do is we want to align the crossover delete pipe so that we can make the cuts at the back. I made myself a couple of hangers, so let's put the pipe up, hold it in place, and then we'll mark it up and align it properly. All right, I'm using a zip tie on the front. So once again, I have to go forward a little bit here. Okay, everything's aligned there. So now we just have to mark the pipe at the back. For the purpose of cutting the pipe, I've got this new tool that I've never seen before. It's an exhaust pipe cutter. So it goes around the pipe and you just rotate it. Wow, okay, that was incredibly fast. I'll be honest, I thought I was gonna have to cut this with a Sawzall or something, but this was awesome. Wow, I'm absolutely amazed at how easy this was. This is incredible. So easily so far, this has been the hardest part of the whole job. It's just simply taking off the bracket. And with that out of the way, let's fit this up.
And on that awesome VR note, we're going to wrap up this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, click a thumbs up. If you want to see more, click subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.